late 1800s, Cuba wanted independence from the Spanish Empire and Spain. This led to rebellions led by Cubans against the Spanish imperial rule. But Spain wanted Cuba to remain part of the Spanish Empire. Valeriano Weyler was governor of Cuba at the time, and he wanted to put down the rebellion. This led to his Reconstruction Plan, which was to separate civilians from the rebels and put the civilians in concentration camps in order to find where the rebels were hiding. Concentration camps were disgusting places with famine and disease. Newspapers in the United States found out about the concentration camps, which led to yellow journalism by William Randolph Hearst of the New York Journal and Joseph Pulitzer of the New York World. It was called yellow journalism because of a popular comic in New York World called Hogan's Alley. The main character wore yellow clothing and was called the Yellow Kid. William Randolph Hearst of the New York Journal wanted to compete with Joseph Pulitzer's New York World, so he hired the comic artist and copied Pulitzer's sensationalist newspaper style. This led to sensationalist newspapers and competition between Hearst and Pulitzer. Hearst would send news reporters to Cuba to write sensationalist articles that would tug at the heartstrings of Americans. Hearst famously said to illustrator Frederick Remington, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." The New York Journal was filled with stories about the cruelty the Cubans faced. Many of the stories described the horrors of concentration camps and the valiant rebels fighting against the Spanish imperial rule. Anti-Spanish sentiments continued to grow after the discovery of the De Lome letter. It was a letter from Spanish Ambassador Enrique de Lome to one of his friends in Cuba. He criticized President McKinley in this letter, which caused anti-Spanish sentiment. But then on February 15, 1898, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, Cuba. This led to Spain declaring war on the United States first, and then later the United States declaring war on Spain. Secretary of State John Hay referred to the Spanish-American War as that splendid little war. The first battle of the Spanish-American War was in the Pacific. Commodore George Dewey left Hong Kong with his fleet to go to the Philippines, which was controlled by Spain. Commodore George Dewey defeated the Spanish fleet in the Philippines in Manila Bay on May 1, 1898. In Cuba, the Spanish Admiral Pascual Cervera led a small squadron of ships to protect Spanish forts. Commodore Winfield Scott Shealy led the U.S. Navy, which trapped and blockaded the Spanish squadron when the Spaniards tried to block major Cuban ports. Admiral Pascual Cervera tried to break out of the harbor to save the ships, but it failed and all his ships were destroyed. American land forces then began to attack the city of Santiago from the north. On July 1st, American General William Shafter attacked the San Juan Heights. The Americans pushed the Spaniards off the hills. The Americans were better equipped than the Spaniards, with Gatling guns and other munitions. The Americans then besieged the city of Santiago. Santiago fell on July 17th, leading Spain to admit defeat in Cuba. The Rough Riders were the most famous regiment in the Cuban theater of the Spanish-American War. They were led by Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt gathered men who knew how to ride horses well and were good with guns. The Rough Riders first fought at Las Guasimas. Later they fought on San Juan and Kettle Hill, where Teddy Roosevelt led the charge. Roosevelt was later given the Medal of Honor for this. On July 26th, a French ambassador approached President William McKinley to discuss a peace agreement between Spain and the United States. On August 12th, a ceasefire was signed. And then later on December 10th, the Treaty of Paris was signed. The terms in the Treaty of Paris were that Cuba would become independent and Guam and Puerto Rico would be ceded to the United States. The United States also bought the Philippines from Spain for $20 million. The effects of the Spanish-American War was that America was starting to become a world power. The Philippine-American War, the issue of imperialism, the Platt Amendment, and Spain losing power.